There's days I get envious of churches that have sound guys that do all that stuff for them. And it's nice to think that there would be someone that would be willing to do that, but in a small church, sometimes you have to do a little bit of everything, and that's fine. Oh, I've got a volunteer here. Only she wasn't volunteer, he was. The title of my message today is Variable Sin, or How Well Do You Rationalize? And I don't know about you, but I have sat out there in the pew many a time listening to sermons that made me uncomfortable. That I frankly sat and squirmed in the pew because it felt very much like that pastor was talking directly at me. And I'm here to tell you that was never a comfortable feeling. And I will tell you this. I never have and I never will preach a sermon to one person. If I'm preaching a message, it is not to pick people out. I've heard pastors do that. But the truth of the matter is, it is not uncommon that in preaching a sermon, you strike a chord with someone and it makes them uncomfortable. And you know, the truth of it is, when that happens, it does make you squirm a little bit. It makes you a little uncomfortable because you're going, wow, sounds like me when he's talking about that. And if you think that that's uncomfortable, try being the guy preaching that sermon. And you know the old saying is, if you're pointing that way, you got three fingers pointing this way. If you think it's uncomfortable hearing that message and feeling like it's for you, imagine preaching that message and knowing it's for you. And that is unfortunately where I'm at. And that's a next level squirming. And I will say that sometimes in today's world we desire sermons that don't make us uncomfortable. They're warm fuzzies. I go in there and he just makes me feel good, and all there is just warm fuzzy things. And I'm not against a warm fuzzy sermon now and then, but I will also tell you that if you look at Jesus' teaching, there were a lot of times where what Jesus said made people uncomfortable. In fact, his disciples would frequently come up to him and say, Lord, what you're talking? It's upsetting the Pharisees because they think they're talking about them. And it doesn't tell us what Jesus' response was, but I'm assuming that what he was doing was smiling and go, it is about them. Sometimes the Bible has got this way of just cutting through the crap and saying it as it is. And in Matthew 5, 17 through 48, we see just such a message. And this is Jesus talking. It says, do not think that I have come to abolish the law of the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. Now, this is saying very clearly that, a lot of folks were saying, well, Jesus is coming to overthrow the old system of laws. And Jesus said, no, not quite true. He says, for truly I say to you, until heaven and earth passes away, not one iota, not a dot will pass from the law until all is accomplished. Therefore, whoever relaxes on one of the least of the commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them to be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. You have heard it said from those of old, you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable to judgment. But I say to you that anyone who is angry with his brother will be liable for judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council, and whoever says, you fool, will be liable to hell of fire. So if you're offering a gift to the altar and you remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you are going into him in court, lest your accuser hand you over to the judge, and the judge and the guard let you go put in prison. Truly I say to you, you will never get out until you have paid every last penny. You have heard it said, you shall not commit adultery. But if I say to everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. For it is better to lose one of your members than it is your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. For it is better you lose one of your members than the whole body go into hell. It is also said, whoever divorces his wife, let him get a certificate of divorce. But I say to you that everyone who divorces his wife, except on the grounds of sexual immorality, makes her commit adultery. And whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Again, you have heard that it is said in these days of old, you shall not swear falsely, but you shall perform to the Lord what you have sworn. But I say to you, do not take an oath at all, either by heaven or for earth, or as the heaven of God, or by earth, which is the footstool, or by Jerusalem, for the city of the great king. And do not take an oath by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Let what you say be simply yes or no. Anything more comes from evil. You have heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn him the other also. And if anyone would sue you, take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go a mile with him, give him 2 miles. Give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you. You have heard it said that you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of God the Father who is in heaven. For he makes his suns rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain to the just and the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brother, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? You therefore must be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. Now, I don't know about you, as I read through those scriptures, I do not find myself real comfortable. I can't tell you how many times I have been angry. I can't tell you how many times I've called someone a fool. I can't tell you how many times I have been guilty of every one of these sins that Jesus is making a point of. And there's a part of me that just doesn't want to believe what Jesus is saying. Surely, having anger or calling someone a fool cannot be as serious as murder. And certainly in man's eyes, that is true. You can get away with calling people a fool all day long and not go to court. But murder someone and man will take you to court. So it is hard for a man to think that just looking at a woman is as bad as committing adultery. Goes completely against everything I've ever been taught as a man. It's just a thing. You just do that. It's part of being a guy. But Jesus is saying, no, it's not. And I will suggest to you that as I read these scriptures, more and more I am convicted by the fact that, no, I do not do very well sometimes. And I would rather skip these scriptures, or I would rather rationalize and suggest to you that perhaps there is a little bit something different about my sin than the other guy's sin. It reminds me of a pastor who was getting ready to do a funeral for a man. There was 2 brothers in a town. Both the brothers were known as corrupt, terrible, just heinous individuals. They were men who just were famous for how evil they were. And when one of the brothers died, the other brother came to the pastor and says, Pastor, it's like this. If you call my brother a saint at his funeral, I will give the church $100,000. Now, there's not too many churches that look at a $100,000 check and don't go, okay. He said, if you don't say that, I'm not going to give you a dime. I'm not even going to pay for the funeral. So the pastor thought about it for a while, and the day of the funeral came, and he stood up and he says, the deceased is a despicable man. He was evil. His heart was truly cold. He was a terrible, rotten person through and through. But compared to his brother, he was a saint. That's the way we want to do our sin. I might not be perfect, but I'm better than him. I'm a little bit better than him. I want to take my sin and I want to minimize it. I want to make sure that it isn't as bad. I suddenly make my sin a shortcoming, an indiscretion, an impulse I can't control, or the favorite of today. I didn't have any hope in this because this is the result of somebody else's sin that did it to me. And so therefore, I am incapable of not sinning because this happened to me. I can't tell you how many children of alcoholics that I have arrested for drunk driving. The sin of the father is, in fact, visited upon the son. But I'm here to tell you that in every one of those cases, the son chose to follow in his father's example. Was he taught a different way? No, he was not. And truly, that was the, in fact, problem, is that he was instructed in the way of sin. But I'm here to tell you, you are given a choice. You are given the opportunity to reject sin. And while man has a million ways to rationalize and justify our sin, you will find also in the church a whole lot of people preaching that sin no longer exists. It's an outdated judgment. And unfortunately, because of that outdated judgment, there are people suffering from lousy self-esteem. And that's not good. And so we should quit talking about sin. We should quit making people feel bad about sinning. And instead we should build them up and make them feel better about themselves. And I'm here to tell you, it is awful hard to have good self-esteem while admitting that you are a flawed and failed person. In fact, there are too many of us who will deny our sin so that we can feel better about ourselves. And again, it's that area of, well, maybe I'm not as bad as the other person. There was a Catholic picnic, and there was a priest present, and he was walking around, and one of the nuns came up to him and says, "You know, Father, I saw you glancing at the girl in the bikini. I don't think it's appropriate for you to be doing such a thing." The father says, "You're probably right, but I know you to be on a diet, and I saw you ogling the buffet." We want to compare. We want my sin to be a little lesser than your sin, and we would try to dismiss our guilt so that we could feel better. And you know, the truth of it is, for the world, they'll say, there's nothing wrong with feeling better about yourself, is there? And I think that's a good question to ask. If I feel good about myself, what could be wrong about that? Well, I will tell you exactly what's wrong with that. And that is that God had designed you with an internal conscience to know when what you're doing is wrong. You've all felt that pang of your conscience. When I look at people, I sometimes see that little 2-year-old sneaking into the cookie jar and getting caught. I know that feeling because I was that 2-year-old. I've been caught sneaking into the cookie jar more than once. And I know the feeling of guilt of being caught. And for the Christian, if you're honest, you have felt that same feeling in your life many, many, many times. Jesus warned the people, unless your righteousness exceeds the scribes and the Pharisees, you're going to hell. Now, the scribes and the Pharisees, my friends, were the in crowd. They are the religious leaders. They're the ones who would tell you, if anybody's going to heaven, we are. And Jesus is saying, no, they ain't. No wonder they don't like him. They became experts at twisting God's word and laws to make what they were doing okay. Jesus did not mince words, and he, in fact, called them out and said, "You are whitewashed tombs. you're going to hell. And I will suggest to you that if you and I follow in their footsteps, we're in trouble. Now, I have spent my life trying to be a good person, and I would suggest that if most people would ask the people around me, they would say, well, you've done a fairly good job. You know, you're not a terrible person. There may be things we don't like about you, but, you know, overall, you've done a pretty good job of trying to be a nice person. And that feels good. But it's also helping me to rationalize and justify what sin I have in my life. I could easily delude myself that as long as I'm part of a church, as long as I've got pastor in front of my name, as long as I do good things, and as long as I give money to the church, I'm okay. I'm doing okay. That is, until I read Matthew 5, and Jesus calls me out. And you know, the truth of it is, when you're called out on a sin, what's the first thing you do? Well, I may be bad, but I'm not as bad as Joe down the street. You know, that guy, he's really bad. I literally cannot, as I read these scriptures, get into my head that calling someone a fool is in the same level as murder. I can't get that into my head because I don't want to get it in my head. There's a part of me that says, no, wait a minute. I'm legitimately okay with calling someone a fool if they act like a fool. And let's face it, you all know people who act like fools. And you feel very rational and justified in calling them a fool because they act the part. And if I'm okay with rationalizing that away, if I have that attitude within me and I don't challenge myself before God, it's easy to not see that as the same. But we're talking about Jesus Christ, the Son of God here. And if he tells me that being angry is the same as murder, well then you know what? I better take his definition over God's or man's. The fact that anger holds the same punishment as murder is hard for me to comprehend. But part of that is because I am a flawed and failed human being. And to be honest with you, that's a depressing thought. To say to yourself, to God, I ain't what I should be. I'm really not good. When I look at myself in the mirror, I see lots of flaws. And the problem is, in today's world, they say, don't do that. You'll just end up with a poor self-esteem. And you know what? They're not wrong. To look at yourself in an honest view as a fallen sinner is not going to make you feel better about yourself. It's not designed to make you feel better about yourself. It's designed to challenge you to say, look, something's missing. Jesus is not calling you to be negative about yourself. Our sin is designed to take us before God and say, look, I'm a flawed person. I'm failed, and I have failed too many times to even count. But I need saved, and I can't do it on my own. I have seen people from the lowest points of life accept Jesus Christ. I have seen people who the world would consider garbage accept Jesus Christ and suddenly become a new person. You hear me talk a lot about Wings of Refuge, but there are women there who are called by the world some of the lowest and most despicable names in the world. They're told by their pimps that they are worth nothing. They have no value. They are complete garbage. And that they should be thankful that they even give them a place to stay and food to eat. You take a woman that's been taught that, who has lived that, and then you take her before Jesus Christ and say, the God of the universe died to save you. He came to give you hope. He came to forgive your sins. And he came to make you a new person. And my friend, when that happens, you see something change. I grew up with very low self-esteem. I was the son of an alcoholic. I did not fit into my community. I literally was an outcast in my school. I did not fit in, and I felt miserable about myself. I was flunked in the 7th grade because my highest grade of the whole year was a D-. You have to have a hard time telling somebody like that they've got good self-esteem. I had a lousy self-esteem. And yes, a lot of my self-esteem problems came from the fact of where I came from and the background that I lived. But you know what? It is something that every Christian has to come to a realization. I am not what I should be. I had a Christian counselor once, and I had been a Christian for about 15 years at this time. I knew my Bible. I knew Christian principles. And she asked me a question that I had never been asked before. And when she asked it, I'm like, I know the answer to this. She goes, if you were the only person on earth, would Jesus Christ still have come and died for you alone? Now, the Sunday school answer, that's the answer you give when you're sitting in a church pew and you know what the pastor's asking. You go, of course he would. And that was my first initial response when she asked that question. Well, of course he would. But there was a little bitty part of me that questioned and said, you know what? Do I really believe that? There was a part of me that said, no, Rick, you are really pretty worthless. You're pretty despicable. You're the kind of human being that I don't think God would die for. You just got lucky to be part of the world that God saved. And that false narrative had been in my life, all of my life. And until I confronted that false narrative, and I realized that that Sunday school answer was in fact the true answer. Had I been the only person on the face of the earth, Jesus Christ would have came and died on that cross. My friends, I cannot scripturally prove this, but I firmly believe that each and every one of your names and faces was in Jesus' mind when he was on that cross. And he willingly said, give me their sin, and theirs, and theirs, and theirs. He died because he loved me. When I changed that attitude, the kid with no self-esteem suddenly started to have self-esteem. When you realize the God of the universe, the Lord of lords, the King of kings, came and died specifically for you. My friends, it's hard to have lousy self-esteem. If God values me that highly, then there is something truly of value in me. It's not my works. It's not my good things that I do. It's not anything that I can be or will be. It's the fact that God loved me enough that gives me my value, that gives me my worth. If you want better self-esteem, if you want to know what it feels like to know how valuable you really are, you must come before God and accept that gift. You must desire to be part of his kingdom. And the understanding that he is there not because of I'm good enough, not because I managed to achieve a certain level, but simply because he loved me. I cannot come before God minimalizing and rationalizing my sin. Be honest with you, my friends, there's many churches out there today preaching that type of philosophy. Don't talk sin. It's not productive. It doesn't make people feel good to talk about sin. And to tell people that they're sinners is not good. But my friends, unless I acknowledge that I am in fact a sinner, I cannot come before God and ask for forgiveness. I cannot accept the most loving gift. Because to be honest with you, my friends, to accept the gift of love requires me to know that I am in need, that I am lacking. But once I accept that love, once I accept that forgiveness, once I become a child of the living God, my friends, there's nothing this world can tell me that's going to hurt my self-esteem. You can call me every name in the book because I know where my name is in the book. My name is in the book of life. And beside it is a heart that says, Jesus loved that one. Let him into heaven. My friends, if you want to feel good about yourself, you first have to acknowledge that you need God, that you're not perfect, and that you are failed. I will say, the greatest self-esteem in the world comes from knowing that you are the child of God, and that with that comes all the benefits and all the greatness that God has promised. But if I'm going to live in denial, if I'm going to tell you that I'm not as bad as Joe, or, I really can't help doing what I did because, well, that's just the way I grew up. Or, this may be sin to you, but for me it's okay. I know what the Bible says, but that's an old book. Doesn't matter anymore. My friends, that kind of attitude was what the scribes and the Pharisees practiced, and Jesus made it clear. They weren't making it into heaven. We have to exceed their righteousness if we're going to go to heaven. And to exceed their righteousness doesn't mean we got to be better than they are. It means we have to be honest and admit we will not be better than they are. But that we are, in fact, sinners in need of grace, in need of love. And the beautiful news is that grace and that love is available to anyone who wishes to take it. We can go to God and say, Lord, save me, and he will do in just that. I love how Judy brings these sermons to an end with beautiful hymns. Our sermon hymn today is number 567, Hear, O my Lord, I see it face to face. If you want to know what it looks like to be saved, this hymn will tell you.